The Arizona Territory baked beneath the relentless summer sun. Dust drifted through the narrow streets of Dry Creek, settling on weathered storefronts, wagon wheels, and the boots of every soul who dared step outside. The people of the small frontier town believed they had seen every kind of hardship, droughts, raids, cattle thieves, and bitter winters. But on this particular morning, they gathered for something far stranger than any of those. Outside the county courthouse, a restless crowd pressed together, whispering with eager curiosity. Some shaded their eyes with worn hats while others climbed onto wagon rails for a better view. Children laughed without understanding what was happening, while adults exchanged cruel jokes. "They say the sheriff finally found a use for that Apache," one rancher sneered. Another man chuckled. "Better than wasting a rope." The laughter spread through the crowd. Standing near the courthouse steps, his wrists bound with iron shackles, was an Apache warrior named Taza. Tall and broad-shouldered, he held himself with quiet dignity despite the chains digging into his skin. His dark eyes never lowered, even as dozens of strangers stared at him with suspicion and hatred. For months, Taza had been a prisoner after being captured during a violent clash between soldiers and his people. Rumors about him filled the town. Some claimed he had led raids across the territory. Others insisted he was responsible for attacks that had never actually happened. No one cared to separate truth from fear. To them, he was simply the Apache. Sheriff Amos Briggs stepped onto the courthouse porch and cleared his throat. "The county has made its decision," he announced loudly. "The prisoner will not hang, under one condition." The crowd fell silent. "He will marry Clara Whitmore." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the square erupted with laughter. Even Taza frowned, confused by the reaction. Across the street stood Clara Whitmore. She kept her hands folded tightly in front of her faded blue dress, her face calm despite the humiliation unfolding around her. At 38 years old, she had become the subject of endless gossip in Dry Creek. Unmarried women were pitted on the frontier, but Clara was mocked. The townspeople called her the old maid, whispering that no respectable man had ever wanted her. Few knew how deeply those words had wounded her over the years. She had spent nearly 2 decades caring for her late father's small home, teaching neighborhood children to read, and helping anyone who knocked on her door. Yet kindness earned little respect in Dry Creek. Her quiet nature only made her an easier target for cruel remarks. Now the county had found one final way to embarrass her. Judge Franklin adjusted his spectacles and addressed both of them. "Clara Whitmore, you have agreed to this arrangement?" She hesitated for only a second. "I have." The single word sounded steady, though her heart pounded against her ribs. The judge turned toward Taza. "You have 2 choices. Marriage, or execution." Taza understood enough English to grasp the meaning. His jaw tightened. Death would have been simpler. Marriage to a woman he had never met, in a town that despised him, felt like another kind of prison. He looked toward Clara. She did not smile. She did not look pleased. Instead, she met his eyes with the same quiet sadness he carried inside himself. For the first time since his capture, Taza realized he was not the only prisoner standing in the square. "This is not a marriage," he thought. "It is a sentence." After several long moments, he spoke a single word. "Yes." The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. There were no flowers. No music. No family gathered to celebrate. Only mocking laughter, whispered insults, and curious stares followed every word the judge spoke. When the vows ended, the judge declared them husband and wife. No applause came. Instead, someone shouted, "Now the old maid has herself a savage." More laughter echoed through the crowd. Clara lowered her head but refused to cry. Taza remained perfectly still, refusing to give the spectators the satisfaction of seeing anger or shame. Sheriff Briggs unlocked one of Taza's shackles but left the other fastened until the paperwork was complete. "You belong to this town now," he muttered. Taza answered nothing. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many believed they had just witnessed the end of two miserable lives. Some wagered the marriage would not survive a month. Others predicted Clara would regret saving the Apache from the gallows. No one imagined that the reluctant bride carried a secret capable of exposing the most powerful men in the county. No one guessed that the silent warrior beside her would become the only person she could trust. As Clara and Taza walked away from the courthouse together, neither spoke a word. The dusty road stretched ahead of them, uncertain and lonely. They believed fate had punished them both. Neither realized that this unwanted marriage was the first step toward uncovering a truth that would forever change Dry Creek, and every family who called the county home. The small house on the edge of Dry Creek stood alone beneath a wide Arizona sky. Its faded white paint had long since surrendered to wind and dust, and the wooden porch creaked beneath every step. It had belonged to Clara Whitmore's father before his passing, and for nearly 20 years she had lived there by herself. Now she returned with a husband she had never wanted. Neither of them spoke as they walked up the porch steps. Behind them, curious townspeople lingered in the distance, pretending to sweep storefronts or tend horses while watching the unlikely couple disappear inside. The moment the front door closed, silence settled over the house. Taza looked around carefully. The home was simple but spotless. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books instead of decorations. A worn rocking chair sat beside the fireplace, and pressed wildflowers rested between the pages of an open Bible on a small table. Everything felt peaceful. It was unlike any prison he had known. Clara placed a loaf of bread, a small wheel of cheese, and 2 tin cups on the kitchen table. "You should eat," she said quietly. Taza remained standing. "You fear me." Clara looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I don't." His expression revealed surprise. "Then why do you stand so far away?" She gave a faint, tired smile. "Because we're strangers." For the first time that day, neither of them felt mocked or judged. They were simply two people forced into impossible circumstances. Taza slowly sat across from her. The meal passed in silence. Afterward, Clara showed him the small spare bedroom that had once belonged to her younger brother before he died of scarlet fever many years earlier. "You can stay here," she said. "And you?" "I'll keep my room." He nodded. No arguments. No demands. Only quiet understanding. Over the next several days, they settled into an awkward routine. Every morning, Clara prepared breakfast before sunrise. Every morning, Taza disappeared into the nearby hills, returning before sunset with bundles of firewood or rabbits he had hunted with handmade snares. At first Clara worried he might run away. Instead, he always came back. One evening she finally asked why. "You could leave," she said while stirring soup over the fire. Taza stared into the flames. "I gave my word." She frowned. "To whom?" "To myself." His answer puzzled her. "My father taught me that a person's honor belongs to them alone. If I break my word once, it becomes easier to break it again." Clara had expected bitterness. Instead she found discipline. The stories she'd heard about Apache warriors had painted them as ruthless raiders who lived only by violence. The man sitting across from her was thoughtful, patient, and surprisingly gentle. One afternoon she returned from the general store carrying 2 heavy sacks of flour. Before she could lift them onto the porch, Taza quietly took both from her hands. "You shouldn't carry those alone," he said. She blinked in surprise. "I've carried them alone for years. Now you do not have to." It was such a simple sentence that Clara found herself speechless. No one had offered to share her burdens in a very long time. Still, the town refused to let them live in peace. Whenever Clara visited the market, conversation stopped the moment she arrived. Women who had once greeted her politely now crossed the street. Children whispered behind her back. "There goes the Indian's wife." Some adults were even crueler. One rancher laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Careful, Clara. He'll scalp you before winter." She ignored the insult and continued walking. But Taza heard every word. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains red, he finally asked. "Why do they hate you?" Clara sighed. "I suppose it's easier for people to laugh at someone than to understand them. You were kind before. I tried to be. And now?" She looked toward the quiet town below. "They've decided I'm no longer one of them." Taza nodded slowly. "In my village, we say the strongest tree stands alone during the storm." She smiled faintly. "I like that saying." He looked toward the horizon. "It is lonely, but true." As the weeks passed, small acts of kindness slowly replaced the wall of silence between them. Taza repaired the broken fence without being asked. He patched the leaking roof before the monsoon rains arrived. When Clara's horse threw a shoe, he spent hours calming the frightened animal before leading it safely home. In return, Clara taught him to read more English than he had learned from missionaries years before. Night after night they sat beside the fireplace, sounding out unfamiliar words together. "You already know more than most people realize," Clara remarked one evening. "My mother believed every language opens another door. You speak Apache, Spanish, and English. And some Mexican traders taught me a little French." Clara laughed softly. "The town thinks you're an uncivilized savage." Taza smiled for the first time. "Perhaps we should not tell them." It was a brief moment of humor, but it changed something between them. For the first time since their forced wedding, they saw each other not as punishments, but as people. Yet one mystery continued to trouble Taza. Late one night, after Clara believed he had gone to bed, he noticed a candle still burning beneath her bedroom door. Quietly passing the hallway, he caught a glimpse through the partially open door. Clara sat at her desk, carefully unfolding a bundle of yellowed legal papers. Beside them lay several letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. She studied each page with intense concentration before locking everything inside a small wooden chest hidden beneath the floorboards. When she finished, she looked toward the window as though expecting someone to be watching. The worry on her face was unmistakable. Taza slipped away before she noticed him. He did not know what secret those papers contained. But he knew one thing with certainty. No one guards old documents with that much fear unless they possess the power to change lives. The autumn wind carried a welcome coolness across Dry Creek, but inside Clara Whitmore's home, the air felt heavy with unspoken truths. For several nights, Taza noticed the same pattern. Long after the lamps in neighboring houses had gone dark, a faint glow still shone beneath Clara's bedroom door. Every evening she carefully locked the front door, checked each window twice, and then disappeared into her room with the small wooden chest she kept hidden beneath the loose floorboard. She always emerged before dawn, her eyes tired and shadowed, as though sleep had become a stranger. Taza never asked about it. Among his people, trust was earned by patience, not by demands. But Clara's fear was becoming impossible to ignore. One afternoon, while Taza repaired the corral fence behind the house, he noticed a lone rider watching from a distant ridge. The man remained perfectly still beneath a black hat. When Taza looked directly at him, the rider turned his horse and disappeared over the hill. It was not the first time. He had seen strangers lingering near the property twice that week. That evening, as Clara prepared supper, Taza quietly placed his hunting knife on the table. "We are being watched." The spoon slipped from Clara's hand and clattered onto the floor. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "How long have you known?" "Several days." She closed her eyes. "So, they finally found me." Taza leaned forward. "Who?" Instead of answering, Clara walked to her bedroom. When she returned, she carried the wooden chest in both hands. Her fingers trembled as she placed it gently on the table. "I have spent 15 years pretending this didn't exist." She unlocked the brass clasp. Inside were dozens of neatly folded papers, maps, faded letters, and leather-bound journals whose edges had yellowed with age. Taza looked at them with quiet curiosity. I cannot read all of these. I know. Clara carefully unfolded the first document. This belonged to my father. Across the top, written in elegant ink, were the words. County Land Registry, Original Survey Records. Taza looked up. Land? She nodded. Not just land. She drew out another paper bearing several official seals. The truth. For the next hour, Clara revealed a story she had never spoken aloud to another living person. Years earlier, before his death, her father had worked as a deputy land surveyor for the county. Honest to a fault, he had discovered that several powerful ranch owners, bankers, and county officials had secretly altered property records. They had forged deeds. They had erased boundaries. They had transferred thousands of acres into their own names without the knowledge of the families who legally owned them. Some victims were struggling settlers who could neither read nor afford lawyers. Others were Apache families whose ancestral lands had been seized without any lawful record. My father refused to sign the new maps, Clara said quietly. So what happened? They accused him of incompetence. She swallowed hard. Then they threatened him. Taza listened without interrupting. He gathered every original survey, every genuine deed, every letter proving the fraud. He planned to take them to a federal judge in Prescott. She looked down at the worn journal resting in her lap. He died before he could leave. How? The official report said it was a riding accident. Her voice cracked. But I found his horse tied safely outside our barn. Silence filled the room. You believe he was murdered? I know he was. For years, Clara explained, influential men had assumed the documents had disappeared with her father. They searched his office. They searched the house. But they never thought to look beneath the loose floorboard in her bedroom. I was only 23, she said. I was terrified. Why not leave? I tried. She pulled out a faded letter addressed to a law office in Washington. I wrote for help. And no one answered. One by one, she had mailed copies of the evidence to lawyers, judges, and government officials. Some letters were returned unopened. Others simply vanished. Eventually she realized the county's most powerful men had friends far beyond Dry Creek. So you stayed silent. I had no choice. Her eyes filled with tears. They warned me. She reached into the chest once more and unfolded a single piece of paper. The ink had faded, but the message remained chillingly clear. Burn the papers, or you'll be buried beside your father. Taza's jaw tightened. Who sent this? There was no signature. Do you know? I've always suspected. She looked toward the courthouse visible through the window. The sheriff. The judge. The largest ranch owners. They all became rich after those land records disappeared. Taza slowly spread the county map across the table. His finger traced the marked boundaries. Then he noticed something. Several Apache villages that elders had once described to him appeared on the original map, but not on the current one. They erased us. Clara nodded sadly. They erased everyone who stood in the way of profit. For the first time, Taza fully understood why fate had placed him in Clara's home. This was no longer only her fight. His own people had suffered from the very same crime. The stolen land had divided settlers and Apache alike, convincing each side to blame the other while corrupt officials quietly claimed everything for themselves. We cannot hide forever, Taza said. Clara stared at him in disbelief. You don't understand. I do. They killed your father. They threatened you. And if these papers become public, they will come for us both. A long silence followed. Finally, Taza placed his hand gently over the weathered journal. In my language, there is a saying, truth walks slowly, but it always reaches the village. Clara looked into his steady eyes. For 15 years she had carried the burden alone. Now, for the first time, someone else knew the truth. Someone who did not laugh at her. Someone who did not call her foolish. Someone who believed her. She took a deep breath. Then we'll finish what my father started. Outside, hidden among the distant cottonwood trees, the same rider in the black hat watched the house once more. This time, he saw the lamp burning late into the night. He turned his horse toward town. By sunrise, the men who had guarded the county's darkest secret for 15 years would know that Clara Whitmore was no longer protecting it alone. The rider reached Dry Creek before sunrise. His horse's hooves echoed through the empty streets as lanterns still flickered outside the sheriff's office. Without tying his horse, he hurried inside, where Sheriff Amos Briggs sat with Judge Franklin and 3 of the county's wealthiest ranch owners around a scarred oak table. A rolled map lay between them. So? Sheriff Briggs asked. The rider removed his hat. She opened the chest. The room fell silent. Are you certain? Judge Franklin asked, his voice suddenly strained. I watched through the window. She showed everything to the Apache. One of the ranchers, Horace Langley, slammed his fist onto the table. I told you we should have dealt with her years ago. We tried, Briggs growled. She stayed quiet. But she's not quiet anymore. Judge Franklin slowly removed his spectacles. If those papers reach a federal investigator, every deed we've signed for the past 15 years becomes worthless. And every one of us hangs for fraud, another rancher muttered. Sheriff Briggs stood and buckled on his revolver. Then we make sure those papers never leave Dry Creek. Back at the Whitmore house, Taza woke before dawn as he always did. Something felt wrong. The birds that usually filled the cottonwood trees with song were silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. He stepped outside and crouched near the porch. Fresh hoofprints circled the house. Someone had ridden around the property during the night. When Clara joined him moments later, he pointed toward the tracks. They came while we slept. She stared at the ground, her face turning pale. They know. We leave today. She looked toward the house. And the documents? They come with us. By noon, Clara had wrapped the papers in oilcloth and placed them inside a saddlebag. She intended to ride west to Prescott, where a federal land office still operated. They were preparing the horses when the first shot rang out. The bullet shattered the porch railing. Down! Taza shouted. Clara dropped behind a rain barrel as more gunfire erupted from the trees. 3 masked riders charged toward the house. Without hesitation, Taza grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her through the back door. They're here for the papers, she whispered. They will find neither. The attackers kicked open the front door moments later. Furniture crashed. Glass shattered. Drawers were ripped open as the men searched every room. From a narrow storage cellar beneath the kitchen, Clara and Taza listened in silence. They're tearing the house apart, Clara said, tears filling her eyes. It is only wood. It was my father's. Taza rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We can rebuild a house. Not a life. Above them, angry voices echoed. Nothing. Keep looking. Then came another voice. Burn it. Clara's eyes widened. They're going to set the house on fire. Taza glanced around the cellar. Near the back wall, almost hidden behind shelves of preserved vegetables, stood an old trapdoor leading to a narrow drainage tunnel Clara's father had dug decades earlier after seasonal floods. Is there another exit? She nodded. It comes out near the creek. Good. He lifted the trapdoor. Go. What about you? I will slow them. Before she could protest, he climbed back into the kitchen. Smoke already drifted through the room. One of the masked men struck a match and tossed it onto the curtains. Flames raced across the dry fabric. Taza burst from behind the pantry, knocking the man to the floor. The burning lantern rolled across the wooden planks. Another attacker swung a rifle like a club. Taza ducked, seized the weapon, and drove its stock into the man's chest. A third man drew his revolver. The shot missed by inches, splintering the wall behind Taza. Without wasting a second, Taza hurled a cast-iron skillet across the room. It struck the gunman's wrist, sending the revolver skidding across the floor. Realizing the house was quickly becoming an inferno, the attackers fled through the front door. By the time they reached their horses, Taza had disappeared. Outside, smoke billowed into the Arizona sky. Neighbors rushed toward the fire carrying buckets, but many simply stood and watched. They burned Clara's house, an elderly woman whispered. Who would do such a thing? No one answered. Everyone suspected. No one dared say the names aloud. Taza emerged from the creek bed an hour later, soot covering his face. Clara ran toward him. You made it. He smiled faintly. I told you. Behind them, only the stone chimney remained standing. Everything else had collapsed into ashes. Clara stared at the ruins of the only home she had ever known. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm her. Then she remembered the saddlebag. The documents were safe. They failed, she whispered. Taza nodded. But they will come again. As evening approached, they found shelter in an abandoned shepherd's cabin high in the hills. From there they could see Dry Creek far below. Lanterns glowed in the streets. Life in town continued as though nothing had happened. Clara wrapped herself in a blanket. I used to believe there were only a few bad men. And now? I think fear has made good people silent. Taza looked toward the distant lights. Silence protects evil. The next morning, they awoke to unexpected visitors. 3 wagons slowly climbed the mountain trail. Taza instinctively reached for his rifle. Wait, Clara said softly. I know that wagon. An elderly widow named Martha Collins climbed down first. Behind her came the blacksmith, Samuel Reed, the schoolteacher, Miss Eleanor Price, and nearly a dozen other townspeople. Without speaking, they began unloading supplies, blankets, food, tools, and lumber. Finally, Martha stepped forward. We're sorry. Clara looked at her in confusion. For what? For believing the lies. Samuel removed his hat. We saw the sheriff riding away from your house before the fire. And we've seen too many honest people lose their land over the years. Miss Price handed Clara a small leather pouch. Inside were gold coins collected from families across Dry Creek. It isn't much, she said, but it's enough to help you reach Prescott. Tears filled Clara's eyes. For years I thought I was alone. You were, Martha replied gently. But not anymore. For the first time since their forced marriage, Clara and Taza realized the battle was no longer theirs alone. The truth had begun to spread. And once ordinary people found the courage to stand together, even the most powerful men in the county had reason to fear what was coming. The journey to Prescott took 4 long days. Clara and Taza avoided the main roads whenever possible, traveling through rocky canyons and pine-covered hills where they were less likely to be recognized. The leather saddlebag containing the original deeds never left Clara's side. Even while sleeping, she wrapped its strap around her wrist. Neither of them trusted that Sheriff Briggs had given up. On the morning of the 5th day, the rooftops of Prescott finally appeared beyond the hills. Unlike the dusty streets of Dry Creek, the territorial capital bustled with merchants, lawyers, soldiers, and government officials. For the first time in years, Clara felt a small spark of hope. They can't silence us here, she whispered. Taza looked around carefully. They may still try. Instead of going to a hotel, they rode directly to the federal land office. A United States flag fluttered above the brick building, and 2 deputy marshals stood guard at the entrance. Clara hesitated on the front steps. "What if they don't believe me?" Taza answered calmly. "They will believe the truth." Inside, they were greeted by a gray-haired clerk named Walter Bennett. "Can I help you?" Clara carefully placed the worn wooden chest on the counter. "My name is Clara Whitmore, from Dry Creek. I have evidence of a land fraud that has stolen thousands of acres from settlers and Apache families for more than 15 years. The clerk's polite smile disappeared. "Please wait here." Minutes later, they were escorted into a private office where Federal Land Commissioner Nathaniel Harper listened quietly as Clara unfolded the first survey map. For nearly 3 hours, she explained everything. She showed the original land surveys drawn by her father. She presented journals describing threats against him. She compared authentic deeds with forged copies that had been filed later in Dry Creek. Every signature, every boundary line, every altered record fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The commissioner examined each document carefully. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "If these papers are genuine." "They are," Clara interrupted. He nodded. "If they are genuine, this may be the largest land fraud our territory has ever seen." He immediately summoned federal marshals and ordered the county records from Dry Creek to be seized before they could be destroyed. For the first time in 15 years, the law was finally moving in Clara's favor. News spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, federal investigators arrived in Dry Creek with wagons full of record books and legal officers. Sheriff Amos Briggs met them outside the courthouse with forced confidence. "What is the meaning of this?" The lead marshal handed him a sealed warrant. "You are ordered to surrender all county land records immediately." Briggs's face turned pale. "I'll need approval from the judge." "You won't. The judge has his own warrant." Across the square, Judge Franklin stepped outside the courthouse just as another group of marshals approached. The realization struck him instantly. It was over. By sunset, both men had been placed under arrest. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the sheriff who had ruled through fear and the judge who had hidden behind the law were led away in handcuffs. Horace Langley and the other ranch owners attempted to flee during the night, but posses organized by the federal marshals caught them before they crossed the territorial line. Boxes of forged deeds, false tax records, and secret ledgers were discovered inside Langley's ranch house. The evidence was overwhelming. Months later, the territorial courthouse overflowed with spectators. Families from across the county gathered to hear the verdict. Some had traveled for days. Others carried faded property papers that they had protected for decades, hoping someone would finally listen. One by one, witnesses testified. Former clerks admitted they had been pressured to alter records. Surveyors confessed to changing boundary lines for money. Even one of Sheriff Briggs's former deputies took the stand, revealing how anyone who questioned the fraud had been threatened into silence. Then Clara was called. The courtroom became completely still as she walked to the witness stand. She spoke without anger. Without revenge. She simply told the truth. She described her father's honesty. She recalled the anonymous threats. She explained why she had hidden the documents for so many years. When she finished, there was silence. Then Commissioner Harper held up the original county survey beside the forged version. Every difference was undeniable. The judge presiding over the federal court looked toward the defendants. "Gentlemen, your deception has stolen homes, livelihoods, and justice itself." His gavel struck the bench. "I find the defendants guilty on all counts." Several men lowered their heads. Others burst into tears. Justice, delayed for 15 years, had finally arrived. The months that followed transformed the county. Teams of surveyors worked tirelessly to restore the original property boundaries. Families who had believed everything was lost received new deeds bearing their rightful names. Small farms that had been stolen were returned. Widows regained land taken after their husbands' deaths. Merchants recovered shops seized through fraudulent taxes. Even more remarkable, several Apache communities received official recognition for lands that had been erased from county maps. Though not every injustice could be undone, the government formally acknowledged that those lands had been taken unlawfully. It was a beginning. When Clara and Taza returned to Dry Creek, the town felt different. The same people who had laughed during their wedding now removed their hats as the couple passed. Children no longer whispered insults. Instead, they smiled and waved. Outside the rebuilt courthouse, Martha Collins embraced Clara. "You saved us." Clara shook her head gently. "No." She looked at Taza. "We saved each other." The crowd turned toward the Apache warrior. Months earlier, many had seen only a prisoner. Now they saw the man who had risked his life to protect the evidence that restored justice to hundreds of families. Samuel Reed, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "I owe you an apology." Others quickly followed. One after another, townspeople admitted they had judged Taza by fear instead of character. Taza accepted their words with quiet humility. "My people have a saying," he said. "A river cannot change where it began. But it can choose where it flows." The crowd stood in thoughtful silence. The county had changed forever. Not because of a battle. Not because of wealth or power. But because one woman refused to destroy the truth her father had entrusted to her, and one man whom the town had condemned chose honor over hatred. Together, they had uncovered a secret that reshaped the county, restored justice to the forgotten, and proved that courage could outlast even the deepest corruption. A year had passed since the trials ended. Spring arrived in Dry Creek with fields of wildflowers stretching across the valleys where fear had once taken root. The scars of corruption had not disappeared overnight, but the county was beginning to heal. New fences marked restored property lines, abandoned farms buzzed with life again, and families who had nearly lost everything were planting crops on land that was finally, legally, their own. For Clara Whitmore, the greatest reminder of the past was the empty hill where her childhood home had once stood. The ashes were long gone. In their place stood a new house, not grand or expensive, but sturdy and welcoming. Its wide porch faced the sunrise, just as her father's had. The lumber had been donated by Samuel Reed and other townspeople. Martha Collins had sewn curtains for every window, while children from the school helped plant cottonwood trees around the yard. It had not been built by one family. It had been built by an entire community. One evening, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Taza walked beside her carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You still come here every evening," he said. She accepted the cup with a smile. "It reminds me that even after a fire, something new can grow." He looked toward the distant hills. "My people believe the earth remembers every step we take. And what does it remember now?" He smiled. "That 2 stubborn people learn to walk together." Clara laughed, the sound light and genuine. It was a laugh she had not known she still possessed. Their marriage had begun as a punishment. For months, they had lived as strangers under the same roof, careful not to intrude upon each other's lives. But hardship had slowly replaced distance with trust. Trust had become friendship. Friendship had quietly become love. There had been no dramatic confession, no grand declaration beneath the stars. Instead, love had revealed itself in ordinary moments. It was Taza repairing Clara's favorite rocking chair without being asked. It was Clara stitching a tear in his hunting jacket late at night while he slept. It was sharing meals, long conversations by the fireplace, and silent walks through the desert where words were unnecessary. One morning, nearly 18 months after their wedding, Clara found a small package resting on the porch. Inside lay a finely carved wooden pendant shaped like an eagle. She turned toward Taza, who stood a few steps away with an uncertain expression. "I carved it during the winter," he said. She gently traced the smooth wood with her fingers. "It represents freedom." She looked into his eyes. I thought we already had that. We do. He hesitated. But I wanted you to know, if we had met differently, without chains or courtrooms, I still would have chosen you. For a moment, Clara could not speak. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped forward and embraced him. I would have chosen you too. The forced marriage that had begun in humiliation had become a partnership built on respect, honesty, and a love neither of them had expected to find. As the years passed, Dry Creek continued to change. The new county sheriff was elected by the people instead of being appointed by political allies. Every land transfer required public records and independent surveys, making it nearly impossible for another fraud like the old one to occur. A small schoolhouse was expanded, welcoming children from both settler and Apache families. Clara resumed teaching there, believing that ignorance had allowed prejudice to flourish for far too long. On the first day of class each year, she wrote the same sentence across the blackboard. Truth belongs to everyone. Her students copied it carefully into their notebooks, never realizing how much pain those words had cost. Taza spent his days helping ranchers, guiding travelers through the mountains, and serving as a trusted interpreter whenever Apache leaders met with county officials. His calm wisdom earned the respect of people who had once feared him simply because of his heritage. Little by little, old divisions began to fade. Not everyone agreed on every issue. Not every wound healed completely. But conversations replaced violence, and understanding slowly took the place of suspicion. One crisp autumn afternoon, the county dedicated a small memorial in the town square. It was a simple stone monument engraved with the names of those who had lost their lives because of the land fraud, including Clara's father. At the bottom of the monument were words chosen by the townspeople. Justice delayed is not justice denied, if brave hearts refuse to surrender. As the crowd gathered, Mayor Samuel Reed stepped to the front. There was a time when this town judged people by rumors instead of character, he said. We laughed at a woman because she was unmarried. We condemned a man because he was Apache. We believed lies because they were easier than seeking the truth. He paused and looked toward Clara and Taza. They taught us that courage does not wear one face, speak one language, or belong to one people. The crowd erupted into heartfelt applause. Clara felt overwhelmed. Not because they were honoring her, but because the town had finally learned the lesson her father had died trying to teach. Many years later, an elderly Clara sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree outside the schoolhouse. Beside her sat Taza, his hair now streaked with silver. A group of children gathered around them after class. Mrs. Whitmore, one little girl asked, "Is it true you and Mr. Taza didn't want to get married?" Clara exchanged an amused glance with her husband. "That's very true," she replied. The children giggled. "Then how did you become so happy?" Taza smiled before answering. "Because happiness isn't found in how a journey begins." He gently took Clara's hand. "It is found in the choices we make along the way." The children sat quietly, listening. They had heard many stories about the famous couple who had changed their county forever. Some remembered the trials. Others remembered the land that had been returned. But the oldest lesson was the one that endured. People should never be judged by their age, their background, or the stories others tell about them. Character is revealed through courage. Truth is stronger than fear. And sometimes, the most unlikely partnership can leave behind the greatest legacy. As the evening sun dipped below the Arizona mountains, Clara rested her head against Taza's shoulder. The town that had once gathered to laugh at their wedding now remembered them for something entirely different. Not as the bold maid and the Apache prisoner, but as two ordinary people who chose integrity over bitterness, hope over fear, and love over prejudice, changing the course of an entire county for generations to come.